Now, the International Criminal Court in The Hague has acquitted Ivory Coast former President Laurent Gbagbo. He had been charged with crimes against humanity in connection with violence following a disputed 2010 election. More than 3,000 people died and 500,000 had been displaced. Now, Mr. Gbagbo was the first former head of state to go on trial at the ICC. Anna Holigan has more from The Hague.
A former leader liberated. The judge told this court there was no case to answer. He said the prosecution had failed to prove numerous charges, including that speeches by Laurent Gbagbo constituted ordering or inciting the alleged crimes. Laurent Gbagbo and his co-accused, the youth leader Charles Blé Goudé, were granted immediate release.
For Laurent Gbagbo's jubilant supporters, this decision is a vindication that he is innocent. They are now calling for him to be president. He will, at least, soon be returning home.
To us, President Laurent Gbagbo has been justified in the face of the world. We know him, so we know that as soon as he touches Cote d'Ivoire, that's what he will do. Call people to reconcile, call people to come together, and he's going to be a key player in the reconciliation and the healing phase of Cote d'Ivoire.
The future is all Ivorian to go back to the country. We want to go back. You see, we most of our self-exiled people, we spend like 8 years, some of the 7 years out of our country. And all we want to reconcile the country. We want to go back. And we want those two precious boys, Ivorian, the president and his minister, to go back to the Ivory Coast.
In 2010, Mr. Gbagbo refused to accept he'd lost a disputed election runoff to Alassane Ouattara. There was a political standoff, the capital burned. Bloody clashes and targeted killings left thousands of civilians dead. As the first head of state to be handed over to the court, Laurent Gbagbo's extradition was celebrated as evidence this international institution could bring the most powerful state actors to justice. The prosecution's failure to keep the case alive once again makes it look incapable of finishing the job. And will be a concern for the states that fund the court and for the victims who invested their faith in the prosecutor's ability to find and punish the people responsible for their suffering. Anna Holigan, BBC News, in The Hague.
Well, with me now in studio is Imad Mesdoua. He is a senior Africa consultant at Control Risks. Thanks, Imad, for taking time to talk to us in the program. Sure. Obviously, the big question here is the effectiveness of the ICC and also the prosecutors. Were they hasty or were they incompetent?
I'll leave that for the lawyers to decide. Certainly, what it does, this ruling and this decision, is it brings into greater focus the criticism that many African leaders, African governments, and people who were generally critical of the ICC, all the comments they've made about the ineffectiveness or the political bias of the ICC, they're going to use this decision as a firepower for them to continue criticizing the institution. You've had recent acquittals for the DRC, you've had acquittals for Kenya, and so this just confirms them in their views, and they will use this as further ammunition for their points.
But the big question that other people are asking is, this was just one side of the whole incident, the whole conflict. Mr. Gbagbo was charged, but Ouattara's supporters, some of them who allegedly took part in the atrocities, were not.
So the other side to this story, obviously, is that it's actually going to bring into focus the domestic issues within Ivory Coast. This isn't just a question about the ICC. Given the support that Laurent Gbagbo continues to wield amongst the electorate in Ivory Coast, this acquittal actually brings back into focus whether or not he is going to return to Ivory Coast. It actually poses new questions when it comes to shifting political dynamics that we've witnessed within Ivory Coast in recent months.
What do you think this will change? How do you think things will change now?
Well, as you know, there's a very big, important election coming up in 2020, and the main parties, the FPI, which Laurent Gbagbo was the head of, the RDR of President Ouattara, and the PDC of Henri Konan Bédié, all of these parties in recent weeks have been in kind of a reshuffle of dynamics of power ahead of this election. And many people will be asking the question now, what happens if Laurent Gbagbo sides and brings the support that he has to one or the other camp that are currently running, and some of the candidates they're going to be running. And one thing that's going to be very interesting to watch is the kind of international pressure that's going to be placed amongst between Western powers on Laurent Gbagbo to prevent him from coming back, because many, I think, see this as potentially dangerous to the stability of Ivory Coast.
So for President Ouattara, what would he be thinking now, given today's events?
Well, his spokesperson today said that he's calm and that he takes note of the decision. But as I said, what will probably be happening in the next few weeks amongst all of these political parties I mentioned, and particularly amongst the candidates who really would like to run for the presidency, is they will be courting Laurent Gbagbo's supporters, his support, his network, and they'll be looking to get them on side. And it remains to be seen whether or not Ouattara and his allies will be amongst those people who will be trying to talk to members of the FPI and breakaway factions in the FPI who no longer necessarily support Laurent Gbagbo and his wife Simone.
So quite some impact on the political scene there in Ivory Coast. Imad Mesdoua, always a pleasure speaking to you.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you.